All right. So now we're live
Okay.
with Chris Russo, Home Inspections. Um, Chris, thanks for coming and spending the evening to go over this. Really appreciate it. And this is your flyer here that I'm sharing, and just want to go over that real quick. Chris, do you want to just give a you know your thoughts on this? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Yep. Just a little bit about myself. I've been a full-time home inspector now for the last 4 years. I've owned this business. Before that, I worked with another home inspector just to see if I wanted to get into this business and see what it was all about, and I did, and it's been a great ride over the last 4 years. I am a veteran. I was in the Navy Seabees, and Seabees they're a construction force, so did a lot of building. Had a home improvement business post my naval career, and then also worked in both banking and insurance, selling property and casualty insurance, and I was in the mortgage business. So kind of an eclectic background for a home inspector, but that said, it gives me a little bit of insight into the real estate process, home improvement, getting a loan, getting insurance, and I think that actually helps me
Uh-huh.
working with clients.
I think so too. Yeah, that's a pretty broad perspective there that you have. Some home inspectors only do home inspections and never see it from another angle. Um, I think that's great. Something I really like is that you also do the termite inspections, which a lot of inspectors don't do. I think
Yep,
it saves a lot of time to have both those done at the same time.
it does, and both of those inspections are similar in that you're looking at some of the same things, but a little bit differently. Like if there's a plumbing leak, you note that as on the home inspection report, and then that plumbing leak is also a conducive condition for a wood destroying insect. So, so doing both of those inspections, uh, they're similar in nature, and again, because you're looking at the same thing a little bit differently, it really helps you become more proficient as both a home inspector and doing a termite inspection.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Well, we're gonna get right to it. I went ahead and I pulled the a PDF of the property inspection report that TREC puts out, Texas Real Estate Commission, and I just wanted to go through all six of these pages here with the audience, just so they can understand what to expect, whether they're a buyer or a seller, what it looks like, what's going to be on the inspection report. Can you see that okay on your end, Chris?
Yep, I can.
Okay. So obviously people can read this for themselves, but in a nutshell, what is this first page all about? What are they looking at here?
Well, well, these first two pages of if I can back up a little bit,
Sure.
for those that may not be familiar with a home inspection or the home inspection process, these two pages of the home inspection report are probably two of the most important pages on the home inspection report. Now, in the state of Texas, all home inspectors are licensed. They go through a testing process, a background process, and they're regulated through TREC as real estate agents are. These first two pages of the property inspection report are going to be on every home inspector's report. In fact, the home inspection report itself is called a 7-5. all home inspectors in Texas use this report. Now they can jazz it up a little bit, put pictures in it, use their own narratives. However, each inspector follows a standard of procedures. They use the same type of reporting format. And these 2 pages of the report, in most instances, are going to be in the client's agreement, along with any other additional agreement for the inspector. But these 2 pages are important in that it tells the client what a home inspection is. Also within that report, there's a link to the TREC website that actually goes through the minimum standard of procedures that a home inspector needs to follow. That said, a home inspector could always go above the minimum, but each home inspector on Texas has to follow a standard of procedures to give that client a home inspection. These 2 pages outline that, and it's really important for the client when they get their inspection agreement to read through that, because it sets an expectation of a home inspection, and it gives the client the opportunity, and the home inspector the opportunity to have a conversation before the home inspection. Do you inspect to the minimum? Do you go above and beyond? What is it that you actually do? So that's what these first 2 pages actually describe. On the second page, there's a consumer notice regarding hazards or deficiencies. Mm-hmm. And this page kind of relates to, or in summary, it's like a home inspector is not doing a code inspection per se, but there are going to be certain items on the report that they're going to mark either as deficient or make the client aware of that. Look, we're putting this on the report. It wasn't code at the time the home was built. However, because this item is in the condition that it is in, or it hasn't been updated over time, it could be a safety hazard. Mm-hmm. And probably one of the most the common items that an inspector will put on the report is lack of GFIs. Well, before 1983 or early 80s, GFIs weren't required in the areas that they're required today. So if we're inspecting an older home and they don't have GFCI protection, we're going to note that on the report, even though it's not an actual deficiency because it wasn't code at the time.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, so those first 2 pages, folks really need to go over that. And yeah, that sets the expectations, guys. So, make sure you read that, and we're going to get right into it. So page 3 is titled Structural Systems. And here we have the structural systems. Chris, what are we looking at? Is this this right here has the coding for inspected, not present, deficient? Correct.
And every inspector will follow this same format. Now, in the state of Texas, was the item inspected? Was it not inspected? Is the item not there to be inspected, and is there a deficiency? And one thing to note about deficiencies on this report is you can have one deficiency in a category. Let's just take roof coverings, for example. Okay. And you have a perfectly fine roof. The shingles are installed correctly. Everything is fastened correctly. You have the correct flashing on the roof, but you find maybe one missing shingle on the roof. that
Okay.
category is going to be marked deficient, even though everything else on that roof is fine, but that one missing shingle. And then the inspector is going to list what that deficiency is. Missing shingle, front left side of the roof.
It'll be in the comments and then a picture and all that.
Correct. And if I can back up a minute, is
Sure.
the minimum standard of procedures, again, why it's important to read through there and have a conversation with your inspector pre-inspection, is the inspector is only required to note the deficiency. So in that example of the missing shingle on the roof, the inspector is only required to say missing shingle on the roof. Most inspectors are going to go above the minimum. I certainly do. If I see a missing shingle on the roof, I'll note the location. If I see a roof covering that may be near end of life, I'll note that on the roof covering too. I'll make a recommendation to get a roofer out there for further evaluation. And that's going above the standards. Also, if I can, inspectors aren't required to diagnose or give reasons why they're deficient. However, if we're pretty certain that that roof covering was damaged by hail or the cracks in the wall are foundation related, most inspectors, or I certainly do, will say this is characteristic of soil movement or this may be hail damage or weather related on the roof. But an inspector's not required to do that. They're only required to note the deficiency where that deficiency is present. Now, kind of going back to the top of the page on the foundation, the foundation is the only category in the entire inspection report that an inspector is required to render an opinion on the foundation. And that opinion is either it's performing and supporting the structure as intended or it's not. On any other category, that inspector is only required to list the deficiency, but with the foundation, the home inspector is actually required to say the foundation is performing or the foundation is not performing.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now that's good to know. I mean, why is that? Is that just because the sheer number of issues people have in Texas foundations, or?
I don't know. But it's the only. It could be, but it's the one area where you actually have to render an opinion, and it's a little tricky with foundations themselves. Home inspectors, or most home inspectors, they're not foundation engineers. So there are certain things that we look for in a foundation to say, I don't think it's, or it's not, my opinion is it's not performing as intended or supporting the structure. And then you have to, and in that category, you have to list the reasons why you don't believe it or why you rendered that opinion. Are there cracks in the foundation? Is there floor slope? Are doors and windows out of square? When you're up in the attic, is there structural movement of either trusses or rafters? And again, going back to those top pages, when you click the link on to what those standards of procedures are, those standard of procedures will list every item that the inspector is required to look at during the home inspection and what they're not responsible for.
Okay. Let's tell everybody what grading and drainage means. A lot of people ask that question. They see that and they're like, "What is that?"
Sure. Grading and drainage. What an inspector is looking for is, does the house have gutters? Most homes here in San Antonio don't have gutters. A lot of foundation issues are self-inflicted because you have water just pouring off of the roof, pounding the areas next to the foundation. Over time, that soil can saturate that soil can become so saturated that you start seeing movement or settling in areas, and the home's not moving up and down the way that it should. But also with grading and drainage, we're looking at the perimeter of the foundation to see if there's any indication of soil erosion, if there's what we would call neutral or negative grading around the foundation, where water will move towards the foundation or run off towards the foundation rather than away from the foundation. And we're looking for a slope around the home. And the good rule of thumb is for grading, you want about a 6-inch slope for about every 10 feet of grading away from the foundation. Now, that may not be realistic if your home is built on a hill or on a hillside, but in general, we're looking for conditions that push that water away from the foundation. Seems innocuous, but it's a pretty important, well, all the categories are important, but grading and drainage, very important around the home, because poor grading and drainage can cause foundation issues.
Yeah, it's very common. A lot of folks want to do things with their garden beds, things like that around the house, and never even realize that they're affecting the drainage around the house.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of these categories pretty self-explanatory. Roof. You mentioned roof structures and attics briefly, and you're looking at the rafters.
Yeah. Now, in roof structures and attics, when the home is completely built, that roof structure and attic area, it's the only area in the home that you could actually see framing. And that's pretty important. So you're going to have really two types of construction in an attic. Sometimes they're a combination of both. One, roof trusses, where those trusses are pre-manufactured for the home. They're engineered for the home, and they're built off-site, brought to the home, and then they form the roof structure. For truss construction, we're making sure that trusses aren't cut or modified, that they haven't moved, that they're sitting on low-bearing walls. I mean, there's a whole array of things that we're looking for in that attic. And what you'll see on older homes is over time, they cut trusses to remove mechanical equipment, or things have moved or shifted that could have been foundation related. And looking for kind of the same things with rafters too. Are rafters separating from the ridge board, that board that runs across the top of your roof covering? Do you have proper bracing up in the attic? And then looking for the safety conditions. Do you have wires running under insulation? Do you have insulation covering gas exhaust vents that may become hot and become combustible? Do you have enough insulation in the attic to adequately keep the home cool?
Yeah. Okay. And so, some of these categories speak, most of it is going to be functional, but there's some folks that look at cosmetic things. You're not really looking at the cosmetic stuff so much.
No, we're not. And sometimes we'll mention a cosmetic issue if we think that condition can be related to a structural problem, possibly, or maintenance. So it's unfortunate, but you do go into homes that aren't well maintained, and the walls will have nicotine stains on there, or you can just see that the homeowner, the tenant in the home, just didn't maintain the home. And sometimes those items are mentioned on the report is because if you see a home that lacks that maintenance, there may be other issues in the in the home that are related. But to your point about cosmetic issues, we don't comment on the paint color or the design, or a lot of times there may be a hairline crack in a wall or in a ceiling, or a couple cracked tiles that are really cosmetic in nature and don't impact the structural integrity of the home. That said, if I see those type of things on the report, if the client is there with me and they mention it, I usually note that on the report. I'll note it as a cosmetic item, but I know that that's important to the client and it's a concern.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So moving along, now we're looking at electrical systems, another biggie. Obviously, what are the biggest issues you see with these electrical systems?
Well, for me, to back up a little bit, if there, and it's just opinion and kind of my own personal feeling, is if you can fix a foundation, you can fix a leaky roof, you can replace a window, but sometimes you don't get a second chance with electricity. And so, we're going to give you a good inspection, but my antennae is always up when it comes to electrical systems. It just kind of to back up, during June 27th, that storm that came through, my home was struck by lightning, and there was a small electrical fire in my daughter's room. The first thing that I did is I tripped the breaker on the panel. All the electricity went off in the home. When the fire department came, they said tripping that breaker probably saved your house from burning down.
Wow.
And when we had an electrician come and evaluate everything, the electrician commented on saying whoever built this electrical system or installed it did it right. And that kind of validates why I have this heightened awareness with electricity. And it's a dumb saying, but I'll say this to clients when I see things that are wrong in the box. A lot of times you'll get, well, it's been like that for the last 20 years. And I'll say, well, it works until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't work, you're going to have a problem. So for service entrance and panels, we're making sure that inside those electrical panels that we have the correct size wiring going to the correct size breakers, that the electrical components in the panels aren't worn, or that don't show any wear or rusting, that everything is secured properly, looking for proper grounding and bonding, making sure that you don't have two wires going into a breaker, that's commonly called double lugging into the breaker. And then two, on a lot of inspections, some of these homes are older and they have older or outdated electrical panels. You still have folks using fuses out there. There are some electrical panels that are a bit controversial, and they're latent fire hazards, like a Federal Pacific panel or a Zinsco panel. So when we see those type of panels out there, we note it on the report, even if everything is working fine. And even with an older electrical system in the home, it may not have the capacity to function properly with newer, modern electrical equipment. I was on an inspection about a year ago, and they converted the home from gas to all electrical appliances. It was an older panel. They didn't update the panel, and they put in a dishwasher, an electric furnace, and this big overhead vent system over the stove. And when we were doing the inspection, I had, let the client know, I mean, everything's working fine now, but we're going to turn on the air conditioner. We're going to turn on your vent, and we're going to run the dishwasher. And when we do this, all the power is going to go off in your home. We're going to overload your box. And that's exactly what happened. So we look for those type of things on the inspection, but with electrical systems, we want to make sure that everything is correct and safe. Aluminum wiring too in some of these older homes. We want to make sure that we note that or make the client aware that they have aluminum wiring in the home. Again, inherently it's okay. And if you get sometimes, well, the house hasn't burned down from the aluminum wiring, so it must be okay. You always want an electrician to further evaluate a system with aluminum wiring. And probably one of the risks with aluminum wiring is most of the appliances today, you put in a fan, you put in a new light, you do some upgrading around the home, all those connections are going to be copper. So you're tying that aluminum to copper wiring. It can be done, but it has to be done a certain way, and you have to use either a certain crimping method or certain wire ties. A lot of people don't know that, and they just tie that aluminum wiring together with the copper. Branch circuits and connected devices, again, kind of going back to the attic, we're looking at the wiring in the attic to make sure that any kind of splice wiring is in a junction box, and that junction box has a cover on it. We want to make sure that the outlets in the home are wired correctly. Most inspectors carry around a multi-tester that they plug into the outlets, and it'll let us know whether the outlet's working properly and wired correctly. We want to make sure that any light, fan, outlet is working properly and wired correctly. We also want to make the client aware of what type of wiring they have in the home. Is it aluminum wiring, copper wiring, combination of both, copper clad wiring, so they're aware of the wiring in there. So that on that, under branch circuits, the inspector is required to identify the type of wiring in the home.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, that's all those good points. And what about heating and ventilation systems? I know that's big because of the temperature here. It's pretty extreme in August, September.
It is. Now, for both heating and cooling, one of the first things that the inspector is going to do is take a temperature differential, and they either do that at a plenum at the heating or air conditioner, or I do that, and then I also take a reading at each of the supply vents. And we're looking for a temperature differential between 15 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit. How cold is that? How cold or how warm, depending if you have the heating or cooling on, is that air coming from the supply vent or plenum? And how cold or how warm is that air returning to your air handler? And if you're within 15 to 20 degrees of that, if you're within 15 to 20 degrees between that supply and return air, it usually gives you a good indication that the heating and cooling systems are working properly. Specifically with heating equipment, we need to note the type of systems. We need to do that with cooling too. Is it a central unit? Is it a wall unit or a window unit? And then for heating, the energy source. And usually those energy sources are either going to be natural gas, propane, or electric. So we've got to identify that for the customer. On the furnace itself, we want to take a look at the heat exchanger and make sure that it's clean, that you don't have debris in there, that there isn't any type of cracking or damage. We're looking at the flame. Sometimes a little difficult to see, but do we have a nice blue flame running from those burners? If they're different colors, it usually gives us an indication that you may have a poor poor venting or poor primary air going into the furnace, or you may have a poor air-gas combination. And just making sure that all the connections are correct going into it, going into that furnace or air handler. On the cooling equipment, again, we want to make sure we're identifying the type of system, central wall unit, window unit. And then we're looking at that exterior AC condenser to, again, make sure that there isn't any damage to the condenser fins. We'll look at the evaporator coil, if we can get access to it, to make sure that there isn't any damage to the coil fins on the evaporator coil. And then, again, I had mentioned temperature differential.
Yeah.
Geez, just an array. Usually, too, what home inspectors, too, is that if the equipment is running fine, everything tests out okay, a lot of inspectors, myself included, will list the coolant type. Again, it's above the minimum standard, but we usually list the coolant type as either being R22 or 410A. And we do that because the older type of coolant, R22, is being discontinued. You may not be able to find that after 2020. And it's just a good thing for the client to know that if things start breaking down with an R22 unit, you're probably going to be replacing that unit. Additionally, when we get to some of these appliances in your heating and cooling, water heater, we usually list, or I do, most home inspectors do, the age of the equipment. Because again, in the standards, was it working? And so you have a 30-year air conditioner using R22, and it's working fine, and you put no problems of observer working as intended, and then the customer moves in the house, and a month later it breaks down. AC guy says, you need a whole unit, it's 12 grand. You're going to get a phone call. Say, my air conditioner broke down. Why didn't you tell me it was 30 years old?
Oh, yeah. That happens. I've had my fair share of people moving in and, months later, they got a problem. But, most of the time we get that home warranty and we get it buttoned up and taken care of, but it happens.
Got it. Duct systems, again, one of the reasons most home inspectors will take a reading at each of the supply registers is to make sure that we have consistency in temperature coming out of each of those registers. When we don't, we're going to take a close look at the duct systems in the attic. But if there's a huge variance in one of the supply vents as opposed to the others that are pretty consistent, it's usually an indication that you may have a tear in a duct or a disconnected duct or no duct running to that vent at all. So we want to make sure that the duct systems are operating as intended, that they're not damaged. In some of the older homes and even newer homes, you'll see just the ducts laying on top of the attic or things stored on top of ducts. We want to make sure that there isn't anything along that duct system or vent system that can damage or compress the ducts, which can restrict airflow to the home. And that's primarily what we're looking at in that category, is to make sure that everything is working correctly and we don't see signs of rip, tears, or mechanical damage.
Perfect.
So for plumbing, again, home inspector is required to locate the water meter for the client, whether there's a water supply valve or shut off. On a lot of homes, you don't have a shut off, so you note that is not present or observed. And we take a static water pressure reading at one of the hose bibs. I like to take a reading at each of the hose bibs just to make sure that the pressure is the same or close to the same. For water pressure, we want that water pressure between 40 and 80 psi. If it's above 80 psi, it can start doing some damage to the supply line piping in the home. And if that's the case, you're going to want to install a pressure reducing valve on the home and a water expansion tank at the water heater. Now, on newer homes, they're all going to have pressure reducing valves and water expansion tanks. But on some of these older homes, it wasn't required at the time of the inspection. An inspector is going to run a significant amount of water in the home and check for water flow. Sometimes you start turning on multiple fixtures and you lose quite a bit of flow in the home, and we're going to note that any indication of present leakage and then any indication of past leakage. So if we see water stains under a kitchen sink or on a wall by a plumbing fixture or ceiling by a plumbing fixture, we're gonna note that, even if that condition was corrected or things aren't wet at the time of the inspection. So for the plumbing supply and distribution, that inspector is going to run every fixture in the home, look at any type of plumbing fixtures that are accessible, and write a narrative around it if there's any type of condition. For the drain waste and vents, again, as you're running those plumbing fixtures, we're going to look for any indication of blockage in a drain. And then most inspectors are going to check for cleanouts. They're usually at the exterior of the home, and if things become so clogged inside the home that main drain becomes blocked, you use that cleanout to clean it out. If there's trees growing on your drain line, usually your inspector is going to note that too, to have it scoped out to make sure that those root systems haven't invaded the drain line. And that's on older homes that have clay pipes, clay piping, and even with some of the newer PVC, it's a problem. And you don't know it's a problem. You have effluent leaking out in your yard. That can happen for years, and you don't know it other than the grass may be a little bit greener along the drain line because you're fertilizing it. But then one day everything just starts backing up in your home. So an inspector, if they see something that raises their antennae on the drain line system, they're going to note that. And again, and with every category, when there's a deficiency there, they usually say, look, you want to get a plumber to further evaluate this. And again, if they know that drain line is definitively blocked, they may say, look, your drain line is blocked.
Yeah.
For the water heater, again, we're going to list that energy source, and it's going to be either run by electricity, propane, or natural gas. How many gallons that water heater is. We want to make sure, obviously, that we have hot water in the home, but on the water heater itself, we're looking for any indication of leakage on the home, that the safety equipment on the water heater is working as intended. Each water heater will come with a pressure regulator or a temperature pressure valve. We want to make sure that's working. Just in the event that water heater becomes too hot or overpressurized, we want to make sure that that valve activates and relieves that pressure before it does damage to the water heater. For gas water heaters, we want to make sure that that water heater is elevated at least 18 inches off of the ground to prevent any type of flammable vapor from reaching the pilot light. And then depending where that water heater is located, we want to make sure that there's a pan and a drainage material to the exterior of the home. So if things go wrong, we're not flooding your home. Especially in an attic, if you have a leak in the attic and that safety equipment and drainage equipment isn't working, you can do significant damage to your home. And I've seen where that's happened.
Mm. Okay.
On that hydro, that's a jacuzzi or a whirlpool. So if it's present, we'll inspect it. And then in each of these categories, they have another. So you may have a water softener in the home or some type of plumbing system that isn't noted in the report. So if it's inspected, the inspector will see the other category and then just put water softener in there and whether they inspected it or not.
Awesome. Okay.
Dishwashers, again, the appliances in the home, just for each of these appliances, we're just making sure that they're functioning as intended. With dishwashers, we want to make sure that the components inside the dishwasher, like your sprayer arm, is working properly, and the drain line is looped properly so you don't have water backflowing into the from your sink garbage disposal and into the dishwasher. Is the food waste garbage disposal working properly? Range hood and exhaust systems, are they working correctly? Do you have the correct venting material? With ovens, again, same thing. With an oven, an inspector will test the cooktop, but test the bake cycle at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're looking for that temperature when it reaches 350 to be 350 or within 25 degrees of 350. And that would be normal. Making sure that there's an anti-tip device on the stove. For venting, and this is really common in older homes, an inspector will mention it. We want to make sure that, again, that your exhaust fans and heaters are working properly, but also that they're venting to the exterior. In a lot of these older homes, they just vent right into the attic.
Yeah, I see that a lot.
Garage door openers, we want to make sure that, again, everything is working properly on your garage door opener, that you have the correct tension on the chain or pulley, that the garage auto reverses, that you have sensors on the door and that they auto reverse when you stick your foot under there or grab onto that garage door as it's closing, that the door auto reverses. So for garage door openers, it's functionality and it's safety. Dryer exhaust vents, we want to make sure that, again, what we can see of the venting system, that it's the correct material and that there's an exhaust to the exterior. And I got to tell you, on a lot of the rehab homes that I do, and I would say it runs at about 30%. They do a rehab, they build an interior laundry room, or remove the laundry room, and they don't install a dryer vent.
Oh boy. Oh boy. That's a no-no, huh?
Yeah, and well, it's not funny, but it kind of is in a way, because when you see the home as a rehab, or what we would call flip, you kind of make that bet when you go to the home. I wonder if there's a dryer vent there, and
oh boy.
Sometimes it's not, and that is just something you don't want to miss, because that's going to be a phone call when they're hooking up the dryer, and it's like there's no vent here.
Yeah.
Or
right.
You'll see a vent or a cutout in the wall, and you don't see a vent at the exterior. There's just a cutout there. So you want to validate that you have that vent system is in total, and venting at the exterior. Also with dryer vents, especially gas ones, you want to make sure that they're lint free, and a lot of times you don't have an opportunity to turn on a dryer because there's no dryer there. But you want to make sure that that dryer is not clogged up. It's a safety issue, and that lint can cause a fire.
Oh, yeah.
And then on the bottom of this report, there are optional systems that the inspector is, they're not required to inspect it unless the client wants them to inspect it, or they go ahead and inspect it, and it's your sprinkler system, pools and hot tubs, outbuildings, and usually the outbuilding is maybe you have an exterior garage or pool house, an additional exterior garage, a pool house or a workshop, that type of thing. And with outbuildings, I've seen outbuildings that are almost the size of the home. And when you're inspecting an outbuilding, everything on this inspection report would be part of that outbuilding inspection. Wells, septic systems. And what's important to note on a well or septic system is if the inspector is going to inspect it, and they're not a well inspector or septic inspector, they're following a standard of procedures, again, which can be found on the TREC website. These two areas are pretty important because when a client hires you to inspect and says, hey, I have a well, I have a sewage disposal system, will you inspect it? And then inspector says yes. If they're not licensed to do a full well inspection or septic inspection, there are certain things that they look for that's not technically exhausted or invasive, where the client may think, geez, they're going to pull the caps off of here, they're going to empty the septic system, they're going to look at it, and most inspectors aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
And kind of that said, going back to those first two pages, a home inspection in and of itself, it's not a technically exhaustive inspection. An inspector can't tear apart the AC system or a furnace. They can. However, when you start deviating from those standards of procedures and you break something or you're wrong, that inspector can get themselves in a lot of trouble. And I think the clients will inherently understand that, yes, you can't check Freon levels or rip this whole air handler apart. But on the wells and septic systems, sometimes they're under the impression that you're going to open up those tanks on there and drain them or pump them. Or for a conventional system, sometimes those tanks are buried that you're going to get a shovel out there and dig to the tank access and pull that out. And most inspectors aren't going to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It's overall just an overview of the house, in basically calling out the most obvious and then giving recommendations for additional evaluation where needed.
It is, and I kind of use the analogy as a home inspector, as a generalist or a doctor. So you go to a doctor and you have a sore throat. You know, being a generalist, he's gonna do some diagnostics and ask questions and look at your throat. He's gonna see it's a little bit red. And sometimes as a home inspector, he's going to make a decision. It's going to go home and take some Robitussin, and I think you'll be fine. Other times he's going to look at it and go, you know, I think you should go see a throat specialist because this looks a little bit more than just a sore throat. But he's not going to that doctor's not going to say, geez, I think you have meningitis or something, really serious. He's going to say, I think you need to see a throat specialist.
Yeah.
And that's what a home inspector is in a lot of ways. They're looking at conditions, they're looking at deficiencies, and sometimes we're able to say, look, the outlet is loose, just tighten it, and you'll be fine. Other times it's, you have a problem with this electrical system, and an electrician really needs to come in and further evaluate it, because it goes beyond what I'm able to do.
Yeah. Well, Chris, that was super, man.
I hope so. I hope I wasn't rambling through this.
No, you know what? I mean, you got to get through the whole report to understand what's in it. I mean, it's, for those that make it through the entire report, they're going to be ready for what's to come.
Yeah, I think with a home inspection, what's important now in the real estate transaction, they get to know the realtor, they get to know you a little bit. You're showing homes, you're building that relationship. With a home inspector, it really doesn't work like that. And it's a pretty important part of the process. And so a lot of times, they're Googling a home inspector, or they're asking the realtor, hey, do you have a few home inspectors that you could recommend? And then you set up a home inspection, and it's during your option period. So you've got to get in there in the next day or two or three, and you're in and you're out. So kind of my philosophy as a home inspector, I think, obviously, if you have a good rapport and trust your realtor, you use one of those recommendations. But there are different type of clients out there. As you know, there are the first-time home buyer. What's a gutter? Or what does this mean? There are the construction savvy folks out there that you want that report in technical terms, where the non-construction person or first-time home buyer or someone that hasn't really gone through the inspection process, they want that report to be a little bit more pedestrian, so they understand what that condition means. And for me, I like when the client's actually at the inspection, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to get the agreement, they're going to sign it, they're going to send it back. They're not going to read those 2 inspections. They're not going to go on the TREC website and look go through the standards and procedures. They're too stressed out with the buying process. They're just too excited. They want this house, and they see the inspection as just, gee, this is just a formality. Let's get this done. Let's go on to the next step. Let's get the loan. So for me, I like when the client's there. It gives me the opportunity to ask questions, to kind of see what they do, what their level of expertise is. And then I try and write the report in a manner that they understand it. So if they're that, I don't know much about construction or inspections, I'll be a little bit more pedestrian in my commentary. And if they're an electrical or a foundation guy or a roofer, I'm going to use the terminology or nomenclature that they understand, so I don't scare them when I'm writing the report. So in that regard, it's kind of important for the client to find the match. So that rapport's there, and they understand, and they know what they're buying, whether there are deficiencies there that they can live with or they need to get fixed, or everything's great, or these deficiencies are just too great for me to buy the home. And it's in that inspector's communication that they're going to be able to understand that. And I think setting that expectation, or the client understanding what the inspection process is, and then being able to communicate the inspector with the client and client with the inspector, so they understand what's going on with the home. I think that's just so important. You want that chemistry to be there. I have a certain personality that works with folks, and I've been on inspections where I know that the client's not feeling it from me. I'm going to give them the inspection. Everything's going to be there, but I know that I'm going to get a phone call later saying, what does this mean? Or can you explain it to me? Or I didn't think you were technical enough in that category. And it sometimes can turn out not to be a great experience. And for me, I know that the real estate process for a lot can be very stressful. And the home inspection especially, I have folks that come to the inspection and they're like, I'm scared. I hope this passes inspection. And I don't want the client to feel that way.
Yeah. No, it's important. Hopefully folks, take that into account. And I have to rush the people too, unfortunately, because, 10 days, 7 days, it's not very much time to get it all done and to go back and make sure that you're still comfortable with the deal, because the home inspectors are busy. And, I think maybe, I don't know, half the people I refer on can't get that same home inspector because they're tied up, you're booked usually about a week out.
I am, and it's great. It's frustrating too. So when you book a week out, that they're going to shop. And I understand it, but it's a frustrating part of the job. But as I talked a little bit about my background at the beginning, and at this point in my life, I really wouldn't want to be doing anything else at this point in my life. I absolutely love what I do. 99.9% of the clients that I'm working with, it's fantastic because we have that rapport, and it's great just building that relationship or friendship, in those couple hours. And it's even more satisfying when at the end of the day, they find the home that they want to move into, and a lot of times they share that with me. Yeah, and so it's a great business to be in. But yeah, the being busy is great. It can be a little frustrating at times because sometimes they're like, "Hey, I found another home inspector," or they get the home inspected, but they don't let you know, and you call and confirm, and like, "Oh no, I had that inspected a week ago." You're like, "Oh, geez."
Yeah.
But that's any business, and if the bane of this business is we're busy, then that's a good thing.
That's absolutely. Well, Chris, I so appreciate you joining us today and sharing, and I'm gonna have you back again for sure, and hopefully I'll see you real soon because that means that we've got another deal.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Well, guys, you know where to reach Chris. You've got his phone number right there, and I'll be sending you his way real soon. And thanks for joining us today. And and
Christian, I mean, even if your folks haven't found a home, and I had said before, man, it just sounds like I was rambling for the last hour. If folks just have general questions about the process, or what does this mean, or what does this mean in the standard of procedures, or what do you exactly do? I get these calls all the time, and just part of the business too is just talking people through the process. I kind of look at it as an interview process in a way. It's when you do find that home, I hope I'm your home inspector, or if we have that conversation, I also want to know before an inspection that, gee, this guy isn't the guy for me. I'm not feeling it. Most times that's not the case, but it can be sometimes. So if you have folks out there, even if they haven't found that home yet or put a bid on a home, and they just have some general home inspection type questions, always happy to accommodate or answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and we'll have you back soon. And you guys have a good evening.
I appreciate it. Take care.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Bye.